I'll never forget the day I picked up Oyasumi Punpun. By now it's been a couple of years, but I vividly remember looking at this cover. An unsuspecting bird or ghost, childlike figure. It couldn't be that bad, right?
Whoa, hey.
This video is dedicated to I can't care less, so maybe you could care more. Alright, I know that joke was terrible, but stick with me. Like, that's probably the only joke I could make in this depressing ass video. Inio Asano truly understands what dark content is. When you think of dark content, you might think of gore or edginess that some anime try. But the darkest content I've ever consumed is also some of the most realistic. There's a reason that people who've read this work don't encourage others to read it. It won't help you in a dark time, but rather remind you of how dark that time is. In my own experience, I picked this up during a bad time in my life. I had a broken leg that kept me home from a sport I gave my everything to. I was stuck in my room for I don't know how long. I had endless hours to reflect, and Oyasumi Punpun made me do exactly that. But hey, it was just a canon event, right? Or just bear with me. I know these jokes are dead, but it's so hard to make jokes with this dark of a manga. Regardless, we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about the manga. Now it spans over 147 chapters, goes through different characters, and ultimately is a lot more than just one story. But what I will narrow it down to is Punpun himself. The figure you see on the cover ends up being our main character. We never see his face, which I take as a reflection of his self-hatred. We start around 2nd grade and Punpun is already depressed. Starting off strong, man, I'm so glad, I can't care less. I am so glad you asked me to make this. Depression at such a young age is tough. In hopeful eyes, that young person has someone to go to. But in reality, that's not always the case. And in the realistic eyes of Inio Asano, all the depression does is shut Punpun down. Just like in the first chapter, where he witnesses the school bully beating someone, he realizes shutting down and keeping quiet will do less harm than it does speaking up, even if that makes him a coward. We're also introduced to 2 key figures in the first chapter, one being his first love Aiko, who proceeds to be his crush to the end, and the other his uncle Yuichi. We also briefly see Punpun's parents, but because of a tragic incident we learn of later on, Punpun has to live with his uncle. If I could summarize this manga, it'd be imperfect people surrounded by imperfect people. Because through characters like Uncle Yuichi, we learn that he's not innately evil. He does the worst of the worst things. He admits that he cheated on his wife. He had thoughts that I would immediately just send his ass to jail if I knew him in real life. But he clearly needs help and he's never asking for it. Rather than seeking help, he attempts suicide multiple times. Both end up as failures and he proceeds to raise a kid despite being utterly unable to. We see this exact story paralleled into Punpun's life, and again it reminds us of the influence these imperfect adults have on these susceptible children. Now besides Punpun, his uncle, Aiko, and Sachi, one of the biggest overarching characters is this quote-unquote god. And not just any god, Afro God. Cut the music. Unfortunately, his name is just that, and the only entertaining part about him. He's actually a manifestation of Punpun's darkest thoughts. Yeah, I meant my title when I said this is the darkest manga I've ever read. There are very few happy moments, if any. But back to Afro God. When Punpun has nobody to go to, he manifests this dude. It also stems from his uncle's chant, which actually was from the time he talked to a 16-year-old girl. Why? Damn, man, is anybody a reasonably, genuine person and not a, come on, why is everyone a weird? Why?
Whoa, hey.
Punpun manifests this so-called god and then proceeds to get verbally abused, misled, and overall worse off than if this god didn't exist. It heightens all of his darkest thoughts, and I think by separating himself and the so-called god, it allowed him to say such harsh things. Now I was just asking if there was one beacon of light amongst this absolute terror of characters, right? And there is. Her name's Aiko Tanaka, the first love I mentioned of Punpun, who is also relatively absent from the manga, but continues to be the main love interest to the end. She fantasizes about running away non-stop and escaping, but not just the home which her abusive mother lives in, but everything. She wants to run away from it all. Despite being an extroverted kid, the harsh environment she grew up in was just the worst. Kids made fun of her, her mother hated her, and the world was basically isolating her. She has nowhere to belong, so she wants to run away even if it's with Punpun. But she knows he won't because he's a coward. As we all saw, she has one of the most heartbreaking ends that I've ever seen. As Punpun witnesses her getting beaten badly by her mom, he decides that he was tired of being a coward. He finally acted on his thoughts, but in this case, it was an assisted murder. Soon after Punpun and Aiko committed the grand felony, Aiko hung herself, likely out of guilt and regret. But in my eyes, I like to think that it was her only way of escaping a world that had no place for her. Punpun attempts to follow suit, but Sachi is there to make him just like his uncle, pay for his crimes by living. There is no happy end. As Inio Asano loves to do in so many of his works, there just is no happy end. This isn't the type of darkness that makes you sad and you immediately get over, or cry about and then forget about it. It sticks with you for a while. It touches subjects of depression, trauma, suicide, and self-hatred through a story of a broken man who couldn't even see himself. It leaves you with the pain, one that just can't be solved, and again, it's why people who've read the work do not suggest it to others. Because the reason this is so painful is because of how realistic it is. The image that people try to pull is all but an image at the end of the day. If I had seen Punpun and his uncle somewhere, I would have no idea what either are going through, and neither would anyone else besides the people they tell. I had this whole thing written about the only positive takeaway from my video is to reach out. But if I said that, it's not only hypocritical, but works like Inio Asano makes shows how difficult that could be. And to be honest, in many ways, speaking out to either your friend or family, it is pretty unlikely that they either understand you or you're just putting a lot of weight on their shoulders, which is a bit selfish. So I'm not gonna say what I originally planned, which was to quote unquote speak out. But I will advise you to move forward and attempt to heal even if it's by yourself. When you let those thoughts linger and you shut down from others, you're only making it worse. And there are no second chances. We have this one life and we'll have to take care of it. Despite my constant reassurance that this is one of the most realistic mangas, it also doesn't include the brightness that we could see in life. Now, I'm not talking about Punpun because his life was incomparable to mine. Abuse basically followed him everywhere he went. But at the same time, if I could meet Punpun before he went off the rails completely, I'd show him Berserk. Yes, a fictional story, not realistic at all. But in a similar way, there was a man hell-bent on revenge and violence, but eventually learned the beauty of life. Then I'd show him Vagabond and Vinland Saga. Honestly, the works are endless. But my point of all of this would be to show that there's a thing called hope. And though it can lead us astray, it's also what guides us to being better people. So if there is one takeaway from this video, it would be to keep your head up, put one foot in front of the other, and keep moving forward.